Do you think the community has an aspect to that in addition to, let's say, the liturgy itself?
I do. And I am not a big advocate of the traditional Latin Mass movement.
Yeah.
I think it's filled with all kinds of problems.
Yeah.
But it does represent a hungering for community, which is basically smaller communities.
Mm-hmm.
And it does represent families that just want to hear clear teaching from the pulpit about faith and morality.
Yeah.
They want their kids to hear
Yeah.
clear teaching, clear Catholic teaching
Yeah.
about faith and morality.
Welcome back, everyone. Craig here. No Jonah, but we have a very, very special guest for you today. We have John Michael Talbot, which I'm amazed. I didn't know if it was really going to happen, but we have John Michael Talbot here, and most of you probably know who he is. I'm going to give him a chance to introduce himself here briefly, but we've got him for about 30 to 40 minutes. So, Mr. Talbot, or John Michael, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I am the spiritual father of the Brothers and Sisters of Charity. And I'm mainly known for my music. I'm a multi-platinum selling, Grammy and Dove Award winning musician. I've also sold hundreds of thousands of books. So had some best-selling books. And I've toured all over the place. I played with the Pope many times. So those have been big events, 800,000 up in Toronto, 500,000 in Denver, 120,000 in Los Angeles. And then, of course, I played for all the way from arena dates myself to parish missions and everything in between. So that went on for a long time. In recent years, I've mainly spent time in solitude, just praying. And that's what the Lord is calling me to right now. Founder of the Brothers and Sisters of Charity. We're an integrated monastic community, which is rather unique here in the United States, but not unique in the church, both in terms of history with Celtic monasticism in the 6th through the 9th centuries, and also in Europe. There's about 10 communities like ours in Europe, which means that there are celibate monks, celibate sisters, singles who, for whatever reason, don't want to become traditional consecrated religious. We also have families. I'm part of the family expression. I've been married 35 years. And then we have domestics who live in their own homes in 6 different regions here in the United States. So, and we have many different ministries, ranging from my publishing business, as it were, or ministry, with recordings and books, to our retreat and guest house and retreat ministry, mainly people coming here to the monastery. We are on 450 acres. And then we also have our Little Portion Bakery, which is a big thing that we have going from the property here. And then I have my Inner Room School of Spirituality that it has been going for about 4.5 years now, with all kinds of courses that I do on the spirituality behind the music and the spirituality behind the books. So I do live teachings with that. And we have some really good deals going with that right now. So, and I'm here mainly to talk about my newest release, Late Have I Loved You, both as a music release and also as an autobiography. So that's a little bit about me.
Before I want to ask you about your book and the music here in a moment, but before I do, what's the size of your community now, either locally there or throughout the country? And I'm specifically curious, like the breakdown of more traditional monks, married people. What's sort of the demographics?
We're basically 15 here in the monastery, and we're about 300 in terms of our monastic and domestic expressions.
Mhm.
So we've been as high as 50 here in the monastery, trying to make community work in the United States. We're lower than we've been since 1987. Making community work in the United States is very difficult. And in the new autobiography, I asked the questions, I asked the question based upon something that we heard in Rome when we visited with the Vatican decades ago. They said, we're not sure Catholicism really works in the United States yet because we're so individualistic and we're so independent. And Catholicism is basically a community-based spirituality.
Mhm.
And so I asked the question, can Americans be saved? And of course, the answer is yes, of course. Jesus wants to save everybody, but we have to do it through fire. We have to do it through the fire of really shedding our individualism and shedding our independence, because we're a very me first people. And that is counterproductive to any form of community, be it marriage or family or any form of community from there on out, whether it's a religious community, consecrated community, and as in a monastery, or the workforce, and even our culture. So our culture in the West right now is unraveling, it's falling apart because we are so independent and so individualistic. So Duns Scotus, for instance, the Franciscan theologian, spoke of individuation, which sees every individual as a completely unique and unrepeatable gift from God. John Paul II was big on this, so was Benedict XVI, but always in a communitarian backdrop. We have taken it further than that into individualism, not individuation. And so we see the individual as preeminent over and against community, especially if the community kind of rubs against what we see as, what we want to do. So it makes building community very difficult. And so we are unraveling as a culture. So we're breaking down. So building community is very, very difficult. And I'm also on a campaign to really rediscover in the Catholic Church the monastic contemplative beating heart of the church, because we've lost that in the West, meaning in Roman Catholicism. Remember, the Catholic Church has 24 some odd different churches within her. Roman Catholicism is only one. It's by far the biggest. Mm-hmm. But there are also the Eastern churches, the Byzantine expressions and so on and so forth. But within Roman Catholicism, which is the Western expression, it's been seriously affected by humanism, which rose in the West. And ever since the rise of humanism, we've tended to define the value of people and of communities in terms of what we do. What do you do? What do you accomplish? And we value worth based on that. And monasticism is not like that. Monasticism is, who are you? Who are you? So we have seen a serious decline in the monastic contemplative beating heart of the church, which has been seen as the crowning jewel of the church ever since around the 3rd century on out, ever since the rise of humanism. And it slowly dropped off, so that now the monastic communities are really trying to beat the drum, and we're among that, of trying to regain, there's a wonderful, we need active communities, we need apostolic communities, and we need apostolic works. But we also need to redefine and rebuild and refire that contemplative beating heart that goes back to a devotion and a spirituality that predates for instance, modern devotions such as Marian devotions or Eucharistic devotions, good as they are, but these are modern devotions. They're all modern and they're all Western devotions. So to go back to those things which are really ancient and really much, much deeper if you understand them properly. And when you refine those, then all the other things are going to find a wealth of and a richness that they didn't have before. So right now, even our devotional life in the West has a tendency to be very superficial. So that's one of my big campaigns and one of the campaigns of our community. So that's what we're about.
And this is something that you think is true for the whole Western Church, but especially the U.S. or?
Yeah, I think it's true for the whole Western Church, but it is especially true of the U.S. And one of the reasons that's true is because when the United States, when we were missionizing the U.S., bishops asked monastic communities to come over as missionaries, come be teachers, come be preachers, come start schools, and then later come start hospitals and that kind of thing. So monastics were often put into missionary roles. I'm in Arkansas, and just one state over, the guys at St. Gregory's, now in Shawnee, but they were originally responsible for what is now the state of Arkansas, a lot of the Texas Panhandle, and most of Kansas. The Benedictines were the missionaries for that entire territory. And praise God that they did it, I mean, it was great. But now they are trying to rediscover what it is to really just be Benedictine monks, which is primarily contemplative. And they also have apostolic works that they do, but it's not their primary focus. Their primary focus is to be Benedictine monks. So that's what we're about. And we would integrate, for instance, solitude, the hermitage, with community life. We would integrate the charismatic with the contemplative, the spontaneous with the liturgical. So we integrate a lot of spiritualities. See?
What do you, I mean, of course, we're all observing what seems to be a crisis in just vocations in general, but in, the diocesan priests that minister to most of us. Is there a parallel between what's going on there? But it seems like, especially the monastic communities and the religious communities especially, are struggling with vocations. Can you comment on that?
Well, yeah. I used to say not too many years ago, 10 years ago, let's fire up parishes and we'll see a rebirth in vocations. I'm not sure I was right. I think now we need to get new vocations into monastic life, into contemplative life. And then maybe we'll see a rebirth in the rest of the church. So we need new members. I mean, any of you out there, and I know we're talking mainly to Catholic men, and you talk about mainly to married men, and I know that. But if there's any unmarried men out there listening to this, we need good Catholic men to join us in our monastic expression. But we need them young. We need guys that aren't weighed down with a lot of American baggage already. So the younger we get them, the better. We like to get them like after 2 or 3 years of school, or even after 4 years of school. And sometimes that's even too much. So if we get them younger, we can always get them college degrees. We can get them online, and then they go do they go and do a residence for a couple of weeks at their school. So we can do college degrees from here, but we want to get them young. before they built up a lot of American behavioral baggage, which tends to be very ego-driven and pride-driven. So we want younger people who are moldable in the monastic thing, because the monastic life is an entire program for those who want to shed their self-will and their ego. The entire, I mean, if you're on board with that, if you want to die to your old self, really, you're going to enter a community where you're going to be with other men, and in our case, with other women. You're not going to live with them. They're in radically different parts of the 450-acre campus or the monastery. So we have a men's area skeet and a women's skeet that are like 3 or 4 acres apart from each other. So, you're not living together, but you're going to be tested just by living in community. And you're going to be under a spiritual father for the men and a spiritual mother for the women. And you learn how to find Jesus, you learn how to find Christ in what your superior is asking you to do, whether you like your superior or not. You learn how to find what Jesus is asking you to do through what your superior is asking you to do. Do this today. Do that today. Here's your obedience. And this is primary in monastic life. It's primary in all consecrated life, for that matter. And when you can do that, and it's not easy, but with the grace of the Holy Spirit, you can do it. Then you are set free. You are totally set free. You are liberated from this bondage to the ego-driven self. I mean, and you become happy, totally happy. And it usually takes, 5 to 10 years to really go around a major corner in your life before that happens. So I tell people, don't rush it, and don't get discouraged when you find that it's a little difficult, because it is difficult.
So. Can you sort of summarize the normal path? I'm sure there's different stages.
Yeah. When you first come, you make a candidacy, and usually that's just a few weeks. Then you become a postulant, which means to pose a question, and that's 6 months to a year. Most people, it takes about 6 months. Then you become a novice, which means a new member. So you don't become a member until you become a novice. And that's a 1-year period, and it can be extended to 2 years. Then you make a profession called a temporary profession. That's the first time you will profess poverty and chastity and obedience. And that can be 3 years, and you can extend it to 6 years. And extraordinarily, but we don't like to do this, you can extend it even to 9 years, but we like to do 3 to 6 years. And then after that, you can make a permanent profession, which is for life. So you don't jump in the deep end. You enter into this thing discerningly, slowly, and up until permanent profession at any time, with discernment between you and your spiritual father, your spiritual mother, you can leave, and you can be asked to leave. If it's not working, we can go to them and say, hey, this is not working out. Go to another community, try another community, or maybe go back to secular life, or maybe try our domestic community. Living this way of life out in the secular world might fit better for you.
Yeah, one of the things that you undoubtedly are aware of that makes you sort of a interesting person to look at is, you had gone from sort of, I don't know what your vows were. I want to give you a chance to describe that. And then you married. You said you've been married, 30, 35 right. years, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I lived the celibate life for about 7 years.
7 years. Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey and transition and sort of any?
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, Viola and I were both happy celibates,
Mhm.
and she had lived the celibate life for a long time, longer than I had.
Mhm.
Uh, and she had been dispensed of her vows, and I was in private vows. So when we spent, basically, we had discerned, me and my spiritual father, that she should watch over the sisterhood. And when we spent time together praying, just praying, the community really um, um, prospered. And when we didn't, the community didn't prosper. But we were spending far too much time together in prayer. And
Mhm.
we couldn't say to the younger celibates, go and do likewise, because
Yeah.
they would get into trouble.
Yeah.
And we weren't getting into trouble because we were older. But so we had to ask some hard questions. Well, if we're spending this kind of time together, what does that mean? And we finally discerned, well, it means that we're going to enter into something that's a little unusual, and that's a monastic marriage. So we discerned marriage, and my spiritual father, Father Martin, we discerned it with him first. And then we went to our bishop and shared it with the bishop. And he says, man, you're the first couple that's come to me in like 5 years and said you think it's the will of God. Usually people come to me and say, well, we're in love with each other. You guys came and you said we think it's the will of God. And he says you're gonna overturn a lot of apple carts by doing this, because I was a public figure.
Already. Yeah.
She was a beloved nun in Dallas,
Yeah.
Texas.
Yeah.
So um, and we did, you know, it got me banned from EWTN for life, for life. Um, but uh, so we went ahead with it, and it bore really, really good fruit in our community. The community, prospered when we were together, and we've stayed together ever since. And we've been happy, you know. So and it's been an example to couples that wanted to try to do this. But it's been unusual because there's a lot of communities outside of the Catholic Church, like the Bruderhof. Um, I think they're probably the most successful. They have about 6 communities up the Hudson River Valley where families live a simple life, a radically simple life. And they have been very, very successful. They come out of the Anabaptist tradition, and they're really good friends with, like, for instance, the CFRs, the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, who we are also friends with. And but for some reason, Catholics have been unable to do that. And I've heard a commentary lately which surprised me, because when I became a Catholic in 1978, Catholics were very community oriented. Protestants were very independent in their orientation. And that, in the last 45 years, has flipped. And now Protestants are very community oriented, and Catholics are very independent minded. And I think that's really sad that, for whatever reason, Catholics are having a very, very difficult time with community. And Protestants somehow are finding community easier. I don't know. I haven't really got my head around that yet. So I'm going to have to give that some thought.
I've wondered if, you're probably well aware of sort of I want to say the rise in traditionalism and how, like, sort of the traditional Latin Mass communities out there
Right,
are.
right,
Do you think, the community, because when I was part of that years ago, it was much more communal. It was
right.
much more of a community than it was in sort of a, let's say, a traditional um, Novus Ordo parish. Do you think the community has an aspect to that in addition to, let's say, the liturgy itself?
I do. I do. And I am not a big advocate of the traditional Latin Mass movement.
Yeah,
I think it's filled with all kinds of problems,
yeah,
but uh, it does represent a hungering for community, which is basically smaller communities.
Mm-hmm.
And it does represent families that just want to hear clear teaching from the pulpit about faith and morality.
Yeah.
They want their kids to hear
Yeah.
clear teaching, clear Catholic teaching
Yeah.
about faith and morality.
Mm-hmm.
The same phenomenon is true with Byzantine Catholic communities, who often disaffected Roman Catholics joined the Byzantine Catholic communities
We see
because,
them.
because of community.
Yeah.
They join because they experience community because they're smaller. They're a smaller faith community.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Byzantine Catholic communities, the fellowship that goes on after the divine liturgy is just as important as the liturgy. I mean, you are almost obliged to go next door to the fellowship hall and have, coffee and dessert and hang out for an hour. And if you don't go, they kind of look at you like, well, what's the problem there, kid? You are expected to go hang out with your brothers and sisters and socialize, you know. So community it's a hunger. The human being. I did a podcast with a guy named Bob Goff, who has written a book that's a huge seller. His podcast went out to 10 million people. So don't get discouraged. There's still go up.
Eventually.
Yeah. But he made the comment that he wanted me on the program because of monastic community, not because of I live 5 days a week in solitude. I'm in the hermitage stage of my monastic life. And then I join the community a few days a week, one night a week, and a couple of masses during the week, and Sundays. So, which is an ancient pattern, by the way. But he wanted me on to talk about the community of the monastic expression. And he said this, and it stuck with me. He says, the average American is lonely.
Mm-hmm.
They live alone, or they go from partner to partner, hookup to hookup, and their sexual encounters aren't meaningful, so they're lonesome. They go to work in their car by themselves. At work, they do their work by themselves. And now, after COVID, a lot of them work at home
Mm-hmm.
by themselves. And so people are really, really lonesome. So we're in this urban sprawl of a civilization, and people are lonely. So the human being is by nature a tribal creature. We're not made for urban life. We're really made for tribal life,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which kind of like the early Celts. It is communal, but it's small. It's made up of a group of families where everybody knows each other. It's kind of like my mother grew up in small towns. We are made really for a small town environment where you know people in the town that you live in. You really do know each other. Or perhaps if in an urban environment, you're made for the neighborhood. You're made for a neighborhood where you really do know everybody. So anyway, we're off topic, but that's okay.
No, I think that's all very true. And it seems to me that in many ways, this is sort of the price or reward, however you look at it, of prosperity, as civilizations, especially the West, became more prosperous, we becoming independent became easier or whatever. And so it seems like there's sort of some parallels there as well. And we're suffering under our own prosperity in many ways, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's look at some of these chats. JD just says,
Yeah.
uh, how do you end up against people ending up in bondage to a human superior's ego? Well, that's a good question. Even if you have a bad superior, you have to trust that Jesus is going to work through that superior. And, there are going to be bad superiors in a consecrated community's history. And, I can tell you story after story where God has still worked his will in a person's life, even through a bad superior. However, there are built-in checks and balances. If a superior asks you to do something that's against the teaching of the church and faith or morality, you're not obliged to do it. Or if they ask you to go against the rule and the Constitution or this of the community that you're in, you're not obliged to do it. Or if they ask you to go against your conscience, you can't do it. But your conscience might not be fully formed, and you're going to bear the consequences of not obeying it. There was a story I remember where somebody was having problems with the major superior of a particular community. I won't name them. And a Franciscan buddy of mine who was well connected in Rome went in and had a meeting between this individual and that general superior. And they came out of the meeting just beaming, and he said to him, he said, "Hey, you must have worked everything out." And they said, "Yeah, we did. He's no longer going to be in our community."
That's one way to deal with it.
Yeah. So the consequences
Mhm.
of following his conscience meant, well, I'm no longer in that community. So that was the consequence. So if someone wants to leave and a superior disagrees, are they still free to leave? Well, anybody can do whatever they want. You can leave, but you might be breaking your vows. We had somebody here want to leave, and the bishop had a couple of years prior had been there for their permanent profession. And the bishop got livid. He says, "Well, they can't leave. They're breaking their vows. I was there, and I'm a successor to the apostles." So we sat him down and we said, here's what the bishop says. Well, how do you feel about that? You want to just leave because you don't happen to like what you're being asked to do? And they kind of went, well, I guess I better rethink things, because what I'm being asked to do isn't that bad, So,
Right.
okay. All right. So there's a couple of things there. This is mainly from one person.
Yeah. Can I hone in on follow up on something then, just because I can't not ask you a little bit about the dynamics of being a married person within a community like this. So, and don't share details that you don't want to share, but when
Huh?
you say a married monastic, are we talking Joseph and Mary type marriage? Or are we talking
It
marriage in
can
the
be either.
traditional?
It can be either. And we leave that. In our community, we don't enter into the interior private life of a couple unless they ask us in. So, for instance, with obedience, with a celibate, we have the right to be much more involved in the interior
Yeah.
life of a person than we do with a family.
Yeah.
So the family takes it takes a higher priority than the community does. So the family is higher on the totem pole than the community. With a celibate or a single, the community is their primary family.
Yeah.
So we don't enter into those private areas unless we're asked to enter into those private areas. But a continent marriage is possible if people so choose it, as is conjugal chastity. So conjugal chastity means that they have sexual relations just like any other chaste Catholic husband and wife would do.
Hmm.
And it's their choice. So it can go either way. But we as superiors in the community, we don't get involved in that through the years. And we've had many families here through the years, and we've had many of them leave. In most cases, the families leave because they're having problems with children, especially as they grow up.
Hmm.
And it's very difficult to hold the line in simple living as children grow up, usually in their late teens, where they get to be 17 and 18, or they grow up and they begin to have problems and they want to follow their children. So, and grandchildren are a problem. You know, they want to go and be with their grandkids. So, so we've
And
kind of seen that the family expression, it's more difficult for families to stay here as a permanent expression.
and that makes total sense. And sort of one final question on that line, if you know, is so one of the things that my co-hosts and I often wrestle with is what is the more difficult path to live out chastely? Is it pure celibacy or is it conjugal chastity? And for those of us that have children and are using natural family planning, there's
Uh-huh.
periodic abstinence baked into it. And I remember being a single guy, and I know what it's like to be a married guy. And personally, I find it far more challenging to quote unquote follow all the rules as a married person than I did when I was a single guy. Everything's off the table. Can you comment on that at all?
Well, both are prophetic.
Hmm.
Conjugal, I mean, marital chastity is in today's environment where promiscuity is the norm.
Hmm.
It is the norm. So to be chaste, whether it's marital chastity or celibate chastity, and that also applies to singles,
Hmm.
both of those expressions are prophetic in today's culture.
Hmm.
So whatever you choose as a Catholic, you are going to be prophetic. And you're only going to be able to keep those prophetic stances with the help of the Holy Spirit. Because by human strength alone, you no longer have the cultural support to stay chaste.
Hmm.
Everything in our culture is screaming to you to not do so.
Hmm.
And all you have to do is turn on the TV or watch a movie. You know, what used to be wrong is now right, and what used to be right is now wrong. As a matter of fact, you're called um, hateful if you don't support what used to be wrong.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't support those things,
Hmm.
you're called hateful. You know, now I don't agree with that. We
Hmm.
employ, you know, somebody in our community as an outside contract laborer, and they are nowhere near close to Catholic sexual
Hmm.
teachings.
Hmm.
They left the Catholic Church and they left our community over this, but they're still friends. And by the way, they're darn talented at what
Hmm.
they do.
Hmm.
So we, you know, after years, kind of a years of separation, they came back and they still help us out. Well, we're real good friends with them,
Yeah.
and we love them,
Hmm.
and they love to come pray with us,
Hmm.
you know, but we differ
Yeah.
on sexual morality
Right.
and a few other things.
Yeah.
But they believe in God. You know, they don't believe in Jesus the way we do, but they believe in God. And otherwise, they're very, very ethical and honest people.
Hmm.
See, so and we've really talked this stuff through. There is no hate there, and they know
Hmm.
there's no hate there. We just don't agree. That's
Yeah.
all. So I believe that you can dance that dance with somebody that's reasonable and they understand that we're not being hateful. We just don't agree. And they don't agree with us, by the way. And I don't think they're being hateful towards us because they don't agree with us. We just don't agree.
That's very helpful to hear, because our channels, and you don't necessarily know a lot about it, but we find ourselves often in between camps. So sort of, let's say, the traditionalists on the one side and more of the, say, more liberal on the other side. And anytime we sort of extend an olive branch, so to speak, to others, even though we understand we have fundamental disagreements about things, we sort of get called out for that. And we're like, hey, we're not endorsing anyone. We can still be civilized. We can still find the common ground that we have. It doesn't mean we have to spend all our time focusing on our differences or just shun each other altogether. I think that's counterproductive. So
yeah. I just think I believe it's Satan's agenda to get us first confused and then to get us polarized. And there have always been differences of opinion about a great number of things, but we don't have to be polarized if we are confused. And secondly, we don't have to be confused, as confused as we are. Let's put it that way.
And I think that's one thing that I think a lot of people find your music comforting, in that there's a sense of, I don't know, I would say gentleness that comes through that. So can we talk a little bit about your new music and your book before we let you go then?
Yeah. I do have to run. So
go ahead and tell us about your book, what it's about and where we can find it.
Basically, here's what I'm going to tell you real fast.
Okay.
7.5 years ago, I've been a Catholic since 1978. I was rock and roller, had an experience with Jesus, got involved in the early Jesus movement. Back then, it wasn't called the Jesus Revolution. That's only been true since the new movie. Back then, we just called it the Jesus movement. I got discouraged by finding all the different, the disagreements among all the different Christian groups. And I started reading the early church fathers, found the early expressions of the Catholic faith there, also read Imitation of Christ, Life of Francis, Benedictine stuff, Desert Fathers and Mothers, and all the early monastic things. They were Catholic too. So I became a Catholic in 1978. Started this community. God gave me a vision of community. So I started this community 45 years ago. So I've always been a serious Catholic. I've not been a Catholic apologist, but I've not been afraid to say, come on in, the water's fine. Let's put it that. I don't believe in pushing people in the pool.
Yeah. But
I do say, come on in, the water's fine. So praise God, a lot of people have become Catholic through my music and my teaching. So that's been a blessing. We had a big fire in 2008. I had to go out on the road and do fundraisers to try to raise money to rebuild the monastery. Most of our main buildings burned down. I was out on the road doing 150 things a year, and and I'd lived most of my life in the Hermitage, so this was very unlike what I usually did. And I was getting older, so I was writing checks that my body couldn't cash. After I did that for 15 years. After Dolly, well, not 15, but about 11, 12 years. And towards the end, I was starting to get really sick. I was ending up in the hospital a lot. Then COVID came, and I had already stopped. God had said stop, so I stopped. But I was still sick. About 7.5 years ago, I don't know whether these numbers add up. I might have to rethink my numbers. But I was in the hospital. I was so sick, and I wanted to praise God, but it hurt to think objective thoughts. So I couldn't praise God. I wanted to say it out loud, but I couldn't form the words because I couldn't think the thoughts of praise. So I began to just mumble in tongues. not Pentecostal tongues. I mean, blah, 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 like that. I mean, I was just muttering and mumbling.
Yeah.
I did it for hours. And in the midst of this, I had a distinct experience of my guardian angel grabbing me under one arm. And I'm pretty sure it was the angel of death grabbed me under my other arm. And they lifted me up out of my hospital bed and out of the room, and they took me to paradise. I could see it at a distance. It
Wow.
was bright. Jesus was in the middle of it, but it didn't hurt to look at it. It was comforting. And in a flash, I'm saying this very fast, in a flash, I could see all my sins, both in number, like I had never seen them before, and in depth,
Mm.
in depth. And at the same instant, in the same flash, I could see all of God's mercy and all of his forgiveness, and I began to weep profusely. And when I had experienced this sufficiently, it was outside of time, so I can't say long enough, but when I had experienced it sufficiently, the angels turned me around and brought me back to my hospital bed where I was mumbling in tongues. And when I got better, I was discharged, brought back to the monastery. And from then on, for about a year and a half, all I could do was weep. I could weep, or I wept when I thought about God or Jesus, when I prayed. In common prayer, it was very difficult to go to common prayer because I would break down in tears. Mass was impossible.
Mm.
The Eucharistic prayer, the anaphora, it was like the roof of the church came off and heaven poured in. Every Mass was crowded. It didn't matter whether it was, 15 of us gathered in the chapel or a big, we had a monastic house down in Houston for a while, and there were 1,800 people in Prince of Peace Parish. Didn't matter. It was packed with angels and saints and the church militant. And I would just weep. And from that, two things happened. One, I put some music together in a record called Songs from Solitude about heavenly worship during COVID. And then I did this Late Have I Loved You CD, which I wanted to capture a feeble attempt at that heavenly worship. So that's what the music is on Late Have I Loved You. Because I felt like, see, in this experience, I felt like, okay, I've got these millions of sales of music, multi-platinum, hundreds of thousands of books, all these awards, started a community, played with popes, da 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 da. But I felt like Aquinas, it's just all straw. It's not compared to paradise, compared to heaven where we're going, where we will know as we are known, and I just got a glimpse of it. That's what we're made for. We're not made for this. We are made for heaven. Mm-hmm. This is just practice. The love you have for your wife, that I have for Viola, it pales in comparison to the love that we're all going to experience for each other and for God in heaven. And it's going to be there. I mean, Viola and your wife, they'll be there, God willing. But we're made for that. Eye is not seen, ear is not heard, nor is it even dawned on our mind what awaits those of us who love him. So I wanted to capture some of that. So we did, I think, a decent record. We put together a nice big record, a big orchestra. The first three songs are about it. The last three songs are an icon and sound from the apocalypse, the revelation of heavenly worship scenes in the apocalypse. The book is about that experience, but also about community and what community is about how difficult it is to live in community. I added, I had two versions of my biography, the best-selling version called Troubadour of the Lord, then Signatures. Dan O'Neill did that. And my editor and Dan O'Neill says, John, why don't you do an autobiography? Tell your story. You tell it. So I took a bunch of stories out that I thought were too long, or maybe a couple of negative ones. I didn't want that to be in the book. So I took those things out and I made it shorter, easy read. Most Americans aren't reading big, long books anymore. They might start them, but they don't finish them. So it's an easy read. And I added some stories. I added some fun stories about the rock and roll days, with, when we were hanging out with the Byrds and the Doobies and the Eagles and all those bands and Janis Joplin, stories that weren't in the other books. But I told them from a first person perspective. And then I told stories about community and then about this experience in heaven. So I updated it. So I think it's a good little set, of the music and the book. So I'm glad we did it. And I'm also, I want to also invite people, join our community. We need members. People want to affiliate with monasteries. But if the trend keeps going in America, everybody wants to affiliate with monasteries, but if we don't get people to join monasteries, there's not going to be any monasteries to affiliate with very soon. Most of the members of monasteries are like 60 and above, even 70 and above in some cases. Don't be afraid to join us. Get your kids to join us. Don't be afraid to have your children become monastics. It's the highest call in the church. I know that's unpopular to say. It's the highest call in the church. To live as an angel on earth. Join us. Join us. It pumps the contemplative, mystical blood out to all the other members of the church. And one of the reasons our spirituality is superficial is because we don't have this contemplative beating heart pumping good and strong in the church in America right now. So join us. Any of you brothers, we need young, healthy men, young, healthy women, intellectually, emotionally, physically. We need strong, good, healthy members. Join us. And any of you young families, we're taking families right now. We are not taking we are not taking singles right now. Just people interested in celibate men, celibate women, and families. And join our domestic community. We need young folks that are interested in our domestic expression. Also, you can come make a retreat. I have 2 more retreats this year. Come make a retreat with me, or just come make a retreat on your own. This is one of the most beautiful undiscovered jewels of the church right here in the Ozark Mountains in the middle of the country. People can come from both coasts. Come and make a retreat here at Little Portion Hermitage and Monastery. It is drop dead gorgeous. Our prayer gardens are beautiful. So come make a retreat. Come join my Inner Room School of Spirituality. We have a wonderful deal going on right now where we've really reduced the prices, and we have lots and lots and lots of courses that are available online. And lastly, if you can't join a monastery, you can eat like a monk. Look at our Little Portion Bakery. We truly have the best granola in America. I am not kidding you. It's called Viola's Granola. And it's the regular and gluten-free. We have both. We also have sugar-free. It's all great. And we also have variations on the regular granola that she makes all year round based on saints' days and various things like Mother's Day and, Easter and Christmas and that kind of thing. all through the year. We also have St. Clair's breakfast cookies, which is a grab-and-go breakfast cookie. And then we have St. Anthony's Hermit bars, which is every monk's favorite. So, and it's nutritious and delicious. And so try it out. I think you'll love it. And you buy one of my records and you always have my records. You buy one of my books, you always have the book, but you have to eat every day.
That's right. Those are available for shipping, right? People can
Yeah.
go on the website. Okay.
Yeah,
Very good.
absolutely. So that's it.
Well, that was a wonderful conclusion, John Michael. Thank you. We'll put links to all that stuff below so that if people are interested in all of that, we'll certainly encourage people to do so. I've really enjoyed this conversation with you. I know you wasn't on your calendar and you kind of had to pop in, so I appreciate you making the time for us, and maybe we could do this again sometime. Okay.
You bet. And God's blessing on your work, and I pray that it grow. And maybe someday it'll be just as big as Bob Goff's, and it'll be 10 million people that you're reaching.
It's all in the Lord's hands.
All things are possible with God, brother.
Amen. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Goodbye.